Welcome, settle in. Let the weight of your day fall away like soft curtains closing, and let the breath behind your ribs find its slow, even rhythm. Tonight is episode 4, a gentle collection of odd, hush-hidden encounters, small miracles, quiet alarms, and the kinds of bright, unanswerable things that press a fingertip to the window of the ordinary world and ask to be noticed. This is not a loud book of panic. It is a lullaby made of wonder. It wants you to drift, to imagine, to let each scene unspool across the dark like a long film projected on the inside of your eyelids. Picture a map made of calm places, a salt-stiff coastline, where the lighthouse keeper counts the waves, a desert highway where the air shimmers like glass, a sleepy suburb whose streetlights blink in a quiet code, an old observatory on a hill with a telescope that remembers everyone who has ever looked through it. These are familiar, human places, and tonight they will meet visitors whose logic is different, whose shapes and sounds we cannot fit into the words we already know. Each story will be gentle in voice, cinematic in detail, and strange in the best possible way, unresolved, leaving space for your mind to wander long after the last syllable. They are the encounters they never explained, not because the people involved were foolish or frightened, but because the world sometimes gives us answers in whispers and sideways glances. Rather than neat paragraphs, listen with your hands loose at your sides. Feel the bed beneath you, the soft weight of blanket, and the hush of the room. I will carry you from one scene to the next like a boat on a calm river. You will meet people who are patient in the way people must be who live by weather and tides, a lighthouse keeper who understands the language of foghorns better than words, a mechanic who keeps clocks and who finds time keeping something of its secrets, a child who stumbles on a ladder of light in a backyard and learns how to be brave in a small, steady way. These characters are not heroes for battle. They are quiet, curious witnesses whose lives shift by a breath and then fold back, forever altered in a small, luminous way. The images will be vivid but soft, a sky like satin, threaded with cold lights, a humming that you can feel more than hear, like someone tuning the world. Footprints on a beach that begin where the sand ought to end. I will paint each scene with slow strokes, close attention to the smell of rain on stone, the small metallic tang of something new in the air. The way is single. Wrong shadow can make a neighbor's porch seem like the edge of another country. My voice will move calmly, with pauses that let you sink deeper. Because this is a story meant to ease you inward, not to startle you outward. Each chapter in this episode will end with a little question, a soft cliff, a bright thread left untied, because unresolved beauty is a kind of invitation. You might close your eyes on that final line and follow its echo into sleep. You might stay awake a little longer and wonder what you would have done in that place, at that strange window of time. Either way is fine. The point is to travel, slowly, to places where the impossible might be explained by nothing more than the patient, watchful tenderness of the night. If you are ready, the first story waits like a door in a dark hallway. It begins in a town that remembers how to listen to weather, where a lighthouse keeper named Mara keeps her coffee warm and her secrets warmer. On one evening when the stars lean in like curious neighbors, the sea sends up a light that is neither storm nor ship, a light that folds into the harbor like a living thing. Mara finds something on her sill that does not belong to her house, and when she reaches for it, the world leans closer and makes a sound like someone unzipping the sky. When you would like to begin, say part 1 and I will read the first chapter in full, soft, slow, and steady, and we will step through that door together. The sea at Dunharrow Point never truly slept, even in the calmest hours, when the waves only breathed against the rocks. The tide spoke with a restless persistence, a low, rhythmic murmur that seemed to pulse through the bones of the lighthouse itself. Mara Linton had grown used to this music. For 23 years, she had lived alone on the headland, keeper of the tall white tower that guided fishermen back to the harbor on nights when the fog curled thick and blind across the waves. She was not a lonely woman. She had the sea, the gulls, the foghorn, and the steady ritual of her lantern. Some nights, when the wind was right, she swore she could even hear the ocean breathing in her own chest, as though she and the tide had long ago agreed to keep each other alive. Her evening ritual was precise. At dusk, she trimmed the wick, polished the lens, and lit the great lamp that swept its warning beam across the shoals. Afterward, she would sit in the little wooden chair beside her window, a chipped mug of coffee warming her hands, and listen. Out here, sound traveled strangely. The foghorn's low groan would roll out like a question, and sometimes, just sometimes, Mara thought she heard an answer. That night, the night the story begins, the fog came in heavy, swallowing the coastline until even the nearby cliffs vanished into pale nothing. Mara watched it curl against her window pane like smoke. She heard the usual groan of the foghorn, followed by the steady hush of waves, but beneath it all, there was something else. A vibration, so faint she almost thought it was in her own chest rather than the world beyond. She set down her mug, pressing a palm flat to the wooden sill. The wood seemed to hum beneath her skin, like the low chord of a cello played far away. Then, a light, not the sharp white flash of her lamp, nor the golden glow of the harbor town. This light rose from the water itself, smooth and liquid, a bluish shimmer that spread across the fog like paint in clear water. It pulsed once, twice, then lingered, a living glow beneath the surface. Mara leaned forward. Breath caught. Ships had flares, submarines had lights, but this was neither. The glow did not waver with the movement of the sea. It expanded, then narrowed, folding into itself as though it had lungs. The humming grew stronger. She could feel it in the soles of her feet now, in her teeth, in the steady thrum of her own heartbeat. She opened the window, letting the damp fog brush her face. The air tasted metallic, sharp, like the first tang of lightning before a storm. And then, as simply as if someone had left it for her, she noticed the object. It lay on the stone ledge outside her window, slick with mist, a smooth, oval shape no larger than her hand, glowing faintly with the same blue light as the water below. Mara froze. No one could have placed it there. She lived 40 feet above the rocks. She reached out, fingers trembling, and the humming deepened the instant her skin brushed its surface. It was warm, and almost alive. For a moment, Mara forgot to breathe. She pulled her hand back, and the glow softened, dimmed, as though it missed her touch. She pressed her palm to it again, and it brightened. Down in the fog-shrouded harbor, a dog barked sharply, then stopped, cut off mid-sound. The gulls had gone silent. Even the waves seemed to hush. The entire coastline held its breath with her. Mara lifted the object, cradling it in both hands, its light bleeding across her skin. She turned toward the sea. The glow below had vanished. The foghorn groaned again, low and lonely. But the answering vibration that had stirred the wood and her bones was gone. All that remained was her, the tower, the fog, and the pulsing blue thing she now carried into her lantern-lit room. Her coffee had gone cold. Her lamp's beam continued its steady sweep. The world looked unchanged, yet in her hands, Mara held proof that something had shifted. Something vast and unexplainable had brushed against her small corner of earth. She set the object gently on the table, watching it breathe light into the dark. It did not move, but she had the uncanny feeling it was watching her. And in that silence, Mara asked the one question that would not let her go. If this is only the beginning, then what, exactly, has arrived? The object sat on Mara's table like a misplaced star. Its glow pulsed with such a steady rhythm that she began unconsciously matching her breathing to it. Inhale when it brightened, exhale as it softened. A slow duet that made the little room feel both alive and impossibly still. She leaned forward, studying it closely. The surface was smooth as glass, yet not reflective. It seemed to drink light rather than bounce it back. The glow came from within, shifting between hues of soft blue and faint silver, as though it contained a sky of its own. Mara had no language for it. She was practical by nature, the daughter of a fisherman, a woman who measured her life in tides, rope, and the keeping of lamps. Things either worked or they didn't, yet here was something that responded. When she brushed her fingertip along its surface again, the light flared bright, and the hum returned, deep and sonorous, vibrating through the floorboards. It was then she realized it wasn't humming. It was listening. Each sound she made, the scrape of her chair, the creak of the window hinge. Even her quiet breath produced a subtle shift in its glow, as though it were translating noise into light. When she whispered, "Can you hear me?" the object pulsed softly, once, like a single word spoken back. Her skin prickled. She pulled her hand away, half afraid she had invited something into her world she could never send back. Yet curiosity was stronger than fear. She retrieved a small notepad from the desk where she logged her nightly lighthouse reports, and began to write. Subject: unidentified object. Emits light. Responds to sound vibrations. Possibly alive. The words looked absurd on paper. Even as she wrote them, she could hear her late father's laugh, deep, rolling, skeptical. Aliens, Mara, in Dunharrow Point? The thought almost made her smile. Almost. She lifted her gaze again. The object had shifted while her eyes were down. Not physically, it hadn't moved an inch, but the light inside it now swirled faster, agitated, like a stirred tide pool. She hadn't touched it. She hadn't spoken. But something had changed. Mara's heart knocked hard against her ribs. "What do you want?" she whispered. The object brightened in response, a soft blue flare that filled the room. And then, impossibly, the foghorn outside groaned again. But this time, the sound didn't drift lazily across the sea. It echoed inside the room, perfectly clear, as though the foghorn itself had been dragged into her lamplit kitchen. She froze. The sound faded. But before silence could settle, another voice rose, her own. Not speaking, not live, but repeating. "What do you want?" The echo of her question floated from the object. Her voice bent slightly deeper, slower, as if spoken by a dream version of herself. Mara stumbled back, chair legs scraping wood. Her coffee mug toppled, spilling cold liquid across the floor. The object pulsed again, brighter, almost eager, as though replaying her words with some kind of offering. It was not just listening. It was recording. And if it could play back. Her throat tightened. How many sounds had it already stored? Mara felt the stillness of the room pressing. No gulls, no wind. Only the object breathing its light, patient and waiting. Outside, the fog seemed heavier now, a thick wall closing her in. She rose slowly, stepped to the window, and peered into the blur of white. For a long moment she saw nothing. Then, there at the edge of the rocks below, through the rolling mist, she glimpsed shapes. Not solid, not clear, but darker patches that shifted where no waves should break. 1, 2, 3. They were not ships. They were not men. They stood still, watching, awaiting. Mara's hand shook as she drew the curtains closed. She turned back to the table, where the object now glowed brighter than ever, casting soft shadows across the room. It pulsed once more, and this time it did not echo her voice. Instead, it spoke in a tone not human at all, a long, low note that seemed to bend the air itself. Mara pressed her hands flat against the table to steady herself. Something out there had sent this thing. Something that was now close enough to stand at the edge of her world. And for the first time, the lighthouse keeper wondered if her tower's great beam had not been guiding ships all these years, but calling to something else entirely. The night pressed down like a weight. Mara had shut the curtains, but she could still feel the presence of those shapes lingering beyond the fog. The lighthouse beam swept its arc across the sea, steady and oblivious. A signal meant for sailors, yet now it seemed to her like an invitation for eyes that did not belong. She paced her small kitchen, the floor creaking underfoot. The object on the table glowed like a second heart in the room, every pulse in rhythm with her quickened breath. She longed to leave it, to shut it in a drawer, to pretend it had never appeared on her sill. But when she tried, her body resisted. Every step away pulled at her like a tide dragging her back. Mara stopped, pressing her palms flat to the table's edge. The object hummed softly, as if sensing her hesitation. She whispered, "You don't belong here." The glow shifted, dimming until the whole room seemed to sink into shadow. Then it brightened again, quick, like a sharp reply. Not agreement, not denial, just response. The thud echoed from outside, low, heavy, on the rocks. Mara's body tensed. She reached instinctively for the lantern hook near the door. lifting the heavy iron flashlight she kept for storms. Its beam cut across the kitchen, slicing shadows apart, but did nothing to soften the cold knot in her chest. She forced herself to the door, opened it a crack. The fog rolled thick and immediate, a wall of pale breath. The sound of the sea seemed muffled, swallowed by the white. For a moment, she saw nothing, only stillness, then movement. A figure stood on the rocks below, human in height, but wrong in posture, as though its joints bent against themselves. She blinked, and in that blink it was gone. Her pulse raced. The fog shifted again, and another figure appeared, closer now, still. Then another, half hidden in the mist. They did not walk. They did not sway. They simply were. Mara slammed the door shut, heart pounding. She turned to the table and nearly dropped the flashlight. The object was no longer where she had left it. It hovered now, an inch above the wood, suspended in air as though held by invisible hands. Its glow had deepened to silver white, so bright it cast clean shadows against the wall. The hum grew louder. This time, it was layered, her own voice whispering over itself in fragments. Foghorn groans tangled with gull cries, the faint static of radio chatter from long ago. Every sound Dunharrow Point had ever known seemed to spill out of it, woven into a chorus that shook her bones. And then, among the voices, one she had not heard before, not hers, not human, a wordless tone, deep and fluid, spoke through the object. It wasn't speech, not really, but something in Mara's gut understood it anyway. A call, a beckoning. Her knees weakened. She steadied herself on the chair back, eyes fixed on the hovering light. She whispered, "What are you calling?" The answer came not in sound, but in the sudden flicker of shadows outside her window. The figures moved this time, slowly, impossibly, through the fog. Not walking, but gliding, their shapes bending like reeds in water. One stopped at the very edge of her window. Its silhouette loomed, half seen, impossibly tall. For a heartbeat, she thought she glimpsed an eye, or something like one, reflecting the object's glow back at her. The hum grew sharp, insistent. The object's glow flared so bright it painted her walls in liquid silver. Mara shielded her face, and in that burst of light, she realized something that made her blood run cold. The lighthouse beam outside had stopped. The great lamp, her lifeline to the world, no longer swept its arc across the waves. The tower stood silent, dark, as if its power had been stolen, swallowed by the very thing she held. Mara's breath caught. In her silence, the room seemed to hold its own. She was no longer sure if she was the keeper of the light or its prisoner. The absence of the lighthouse beam struck Mara harder than any sound could have. For more than 2 decades, its steady rhythm had been her heartbeat, her constant companion in the solitude of Dunharrow Point. Now the night outside lay dark, stripped of its guiding pulse. As though the sea itself had exhaled and refused to breathe again, she stumbled to the window, yanking the curtains wide. The fog pressed close, thick and luminous with the faint spill of the object's glow behind her. But the tower, her tower, was no longer alive. The lamp at its crown sat hollow and black against the mist, the great lens frozen mid-rotation. Mara's throat tightened. The lamp was powered by a mechanism she checked religiously, every evening without fail. It did not simply fail. Not on her watch. The figures in the fog had gone. Or perhaps they had never been there, and she had only seen what her mind conjured in fear. Yet the absence felt worse than their presence. The fog seemed to close in heavier, pressing against the windows like an ocean of glass behind her. The humming swelled. She turned. The object hovered higher now, level with her chest. Its glow had shifted, no longer soft silver, but something harsher. A pale white brilliance that seemed to strip shadows from the room. Every crack in the wood, every wrinkle in the curtain, every line on her hand stood sharp in its glare. And then it spoke again, not with her voice, nor the foghorn, nor the chorus of sounds it had stolen before. This was new, a rhythm like speech, though the syllables bent and folded in on themselves. The sound vibrated through her bones rather than her ears, as though meaning itself were being carved directly into her chest. She understood none of it. And yet, beneath the alien cadence, she caught something terrifyingly familiar, urgency. It wanted something. Her hand shook as she whispered, "What are you?" The light flared so bright she had to shield her eyes. When her vision cleared, she realized it was no longer hovering freely. It had moved closer, hovering only inches from her chest, as though it meant to settle against her heart. She backed away. But the object followed, relentless. "No," she hissed, shoving the chair between them. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the floorboards. The sound echoed wrong, distorted, like a memory out of place. The object pulsed hard. Once, and the chair splintered with a sharp crack. Flung aside by a force she could not see, Mara's breath tore shallow in her lungs. She bolted for the door, flashlight still in her grip, and wrenched it open. The fog swallowed her instantly. Cold, wet air stung her face as she stumbled out onto the stone steps winding toward the tower. Behind her, the humming chased, louder now, resonating through the fog itself. The steps felt steeper than ever. Her boots slipped on the slick stone, but she climbed, heart pounding, until she reached the base of the silent tower. The heavy iron door groaned as she shoved it open and stumbled inside. The familiar smell of salt, oil, and metal wrapped her like a memory. For a heartbeat, she felt safer, as though the tower walls themselves might protect her. She slammed the door shut and locked it, her breath ragged. But the silence inside was wrong. The mechanism should have been clicking, whirring, the lamp above turning its eternal arc. Instead, there was only stillness. Mara lifted her flashlight, the beam cutting through the spiral staircase. She forced her legs upward, step by step, until she emerged into the glass chamber at the tower's crown. The great lamp stood before her, its polished lens frozen mid-turn. She touched the cold metal housing. Dead. But the air here was not silent. It was vibrating, faint but undeniable, like the echo of something vast moving through the fog outside. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. For a moment, all she saw was her own reflection in the darkness. Then, slowly, shapes emerged in the mist below. Not vague silhouettes this time, clearer, taller. Dozens of them, rising like shadows pulled from the sea. They clustered at the base of the headland, silent and unmoving. Turned toward the tower. The hum swelled again, not from within the room, but from above. Mara tilted her head back, through the fog-choked sky. A new light burned, not her lamp, not the moon. A pale, perfect circle hovered above the clouds, vast and steady, like an eye opening to watch, and in its glow, she realized with a sick twist of certainty, the object in her cottage had not arrived by chance. It had been sent, and now, whatever had sent it was here. The circle above the fog did not move. It simply watched. Its light was not like the beam of her lamp, nor the cold shimmer of the object that had followed her. It was steady, flawless, the kind of light that left no shadows at all. Staring into it made Mara feel weightless, as though the ground itself might dissolve beneath her boots. She tore her gaze away, chest heaving, forcing herself to crouch by the lamp's mechanism. If she could restore power, if she could relight her tower, perhaps she could signal the harbor, call for help, ground herself in something human. Her trembling fingers traced the brass fittings, the polished gears, the reservoir she had filled only hours before. Everything was intact, nothing broken, nothing wrong. Yet the lamp sat dead, lifeless. The silence of it was unbearable. She had lived her life by this machine's voice, its steady turning like a heartbeat through the night. Now, stripped of it, she felt as if she were floating adrift, unmoored. The hum rose again, deeper, louder, filling the glass chamber until the panes shivered in their frames. Mara pressed her hands over her ears, but the sound wasn't in her ears. It was inside her chest, inside her teeth, rattling her very bones. And then, a voice, not hers, not the foghorn, not a chorus of stolen echoes, a voice unlike anything she had ever heard. Low, melodic, and impossibly vast. It did not speak in words, but the meaning bled into her anyway, seeping through her skin like water. You lit the fire. We have come to see. Mara staggered back, her body cold. I didn't call you, she whispered hoarsely. But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. Every night, Every beam she had sent out across the waves, every groan of the foghorn, had been a signal. She had not been guiding ships alone. She had been broadcasting to the wrong sky. She pressed against the glass, looking down through the fog. The shapes below had multiplied. No longer a handful, but dozens, scores. They clustered along the shoreline, tall and bent, their outlines rippling as if made of smoke and flesh at once. They did not climb. They did not advance. They only turned their faceless heads upward to her dot above. The great eye of light flared brighter. For a moment, the fog thinned, parted, and she glimpsed the impossible, a shape behind the light. It was not a circle, not truly. It was an opening, a vast, glowing aperture in the sky, and beyond it, something moved. Limbs like rivers of light, currents folding upon themselves, a body too large to comprehend. She saw only fragments, like catching the reflection of a storm in broken glass. Her knees buckled. The tower floor swayed beneath her. She pressed her forehead to the glass, heart hammering. What do you want from me? The hum deepened. Her chest clenched as the answer unfurled within her bones. We sent the fragment. You touched it. Now you are the voice. Her mind reeled. The object, the way it had listened, recorded, echoed her words. It had not simply been studying. It had been binding. She stumbled back from the window, clutching her chest as though she could tear the meaning out of herself. No, she whispered. I won't. But the glow from above flared brighter still, pouring through the fog, through the glass, through her, and down below. The shapes on the shoreline began to move at last. Slowly, silently, they started up the winding path toward the tower. The tower shuddered as the shapes climbed, their movement slow but inevitable, like the tide reclaiming the shore. Mara gripped the railing of the lantern chamber, her breath ragged. As the glow from above pressed harder against the glass, her reflection wavered in the panes. Pale face, wild eyes, salt-streaked hair. But it was not hers alone. Another image overlaid it, her mouth moving when she was silent, her eyes blinking in a rhythm she did not choose. She staggered back, shaking her head. Stop, she whispered. The reflection did not obey. It opened its mouth wider, and though Mara made no sound, a voice poured into the room. Her own voice, bent and wrong, stretched into a cadence that was not human speech. It resonated with the hum, layered into the vibrations that shook the glass. The object was not in the chamber with her, yet she felt it still, as if it had climbed inside her chest, glowing now where her heart should be. Each pulse of light from above tightened around her ribs. Sensing with the phantom reflection's movements, the voice kept speaking. The meaning slid into her bones. Unavoidable. You called. We answered. Now you will carry. Carry what? She gasped. The glass trembled. The shoreline shapes were closer now, halfway up the cliffs, their tall forms bending and swaying as if the fog itself propelled them, their faceless heads tilted up at the tower. The reflection's mouth curled into a shape that might have been a smile. Mara's throat burned, and before she could resist, her own mouth opened, her voice came out. Not a scream, not her words, but something else. A long, unearthly note, perfectly matched to the hum. The sound pierced the fog, rolled across the sea like a second foghorn, but deeper, stranger, older. The shapes below stopped climbing. They lifted their arms, long, reed-like extensions that shimmered faintly in the glow. They were answering. Mara collapsed against the cold iron housing of the lamp, hands pressed to her throat. No, she croaked, her real voice thin and fragile. That's not me. That's not mine. But the hum within her swelled again, pushing, pressing, like something using her lungs as an instrument. Her chest heaved with a will not her own. The reflection in the glass leaned close, closer than it should have been, until it seemed its mouth brushed the surface. Its eyes glowed with the same silver-white brilliance as the circle above. And in that impossible mirror, she heard the truth, clearer than ever. You are the keeper of the light. Now you are the keeper of us. Mara's knees buckled. She clung to the railing, sweat stinging her eyes. Her whole life she had tended a flame to guide others home. But now she was lit by something vast and alien. And she understood with icy clarity. The light had never belonged to her at all. Below The shoreline figures resumed their climb. Their silence was worse than sound. Mara turned to the blackened lamp. Her hands trembled on its cold housing. Could she fight it? Relight her own flame? Overwhelm theirs? The glow above pulsed once, vast and final, as if answering her thought. The hum rose to a deafening pitch, her body arched back, her mouth tearing open, and the voice that poured from her was no longer human at all. The sound ripped through her, vast, endless, not her own. It rolled across the cliffs like thunder turned to song, a note so deep it bent the marrow of her bones. The glass panes of the lantern chamber shook, dust falling from the iron joints, as though the whole tower itself might shatter under the weight of it. And yet the voice did not come from her throat alone. It came from within, from the glowing fragment she had touched, from the great circle above, from the shapes ascending the cliffs below. She was not speaking to them. She was speaking with them. The realization burned her colder than the sea wind. The shoreline figures reached the base of the tower. Up close, through the trembling glass, Mara could see them clearly for the first time. They were tall, slender, their bodies like strands of woven light and fog. Not flesh, not shadow, but some fluid mix of both. Where faces should have been, there were only hollows that shimmered faintly. Like the inside of seashells catching moonlight, they pressed their long, reed-like limbs against the stone walls of the tower. And the lighthouse itself began to vibrate, not with destruction, but with resonance, as though her tower, her home, her heart, had always been one instrument in a choir she had never known existed. Above, the circle widened. The eye in the sky unfurled further, its rim glowing brighter until the fog dissolved completely. For the first time in years, the stars shone over Dunharrow Point. Yet even they seemed dim against the aperture's white brilliance. Mara's breath came shallow. She clutched the railing, eyes fixed on the sea. The voice inside her swelled once more, pulling at her lungs, her lips, demanding to sing again. She tried to fight it, to swallow it down, but resistance was useless. She opened her mouth, and the alien tone burst free. The shoreline figures answered. Their bodies bent and swayed in rhythm, 100 limbs raised toward the light above. The tower groaned, alive with their resonance, and in that overwhelming moment, Mara understood the truth. The lighthouse had never just been a warning for sailors. It was a signal, a torch burning night after night, calling across distances to Vastanaim. She had been a keeper not of ships, but of something else entirely. A flame tended for watchers on the other side of the sky. Her whole life, unknowingly, she had been preparing for this. Her knees weakened. Her throat ached. The alien voice poured from her again, softer now, a final note folding into silence. The hum subsided. The figures below lowered their arms. The great aperture above dimmed, folding back upon itself until only the faintest glow remained, like an afterimage against the stars. And then they were gone. The fog rolled back in as if nothing had parted it. The shoreline lay empty. The figures dissolved into the mist like breath fading on glass. The great circle above closed, leaving only the ordinary sky. Mara staggered against the iron lamp housing, chest burning. She looked at her hands, still her own, trembling, human. The tower around her stood silent once more. The lamp flickered. She turned, startled. The great lens rotated, slow and steady, and the lighthouse beam swept its white arc across the waves again, as though it had never faltered. The familiar rhythm returned, constant, unshaken. Yet Mara knew better. The sea outside whispered its old song. The foghorn groaned. Her tower's light turned again, but in the quiet hum of her own breath, she felt it still, the echo of something vast waiting, listening, patient. And when she finally spoke aloud, her own voice sounded strange to her, as though some other cadence now lived beneath it. "I am the keeper," she whispered to the empty room. But not only of this light. The beam swept on. The night settled. The world looked unchanged. Yet somewhere, in the spaces between stars, she knew an eye had opened, and it had not forgotten her.